have something to tell you that's gonna sound crazy. Everybody good?
Yeah, Spider-Man!
We were together, but something bad was gonna happen. And the only way to stop it was to do the find you. And I'll explain everything.
You're better.
I'm Spider-Man. Or you want to do this, Scorpion?
You think I'm Scorpion?
Do this one at a time, please.
You're the only one who can defeat it.
Also, Spider-Man, Brand New Day is finally here, but is it the comeback Marvel fans were waiting for? Hidden facts, shocking details, and my honest review, all packed into one video. You're watching review, voila, don't blink, because this gets interesting. Spider-Man New Day is a 2026 American superhero movie based on Marvel Comics' legendary hero, Spider-Man. The film was made by Columbia Pictures, Marvel Studios, and Pascal Pictures, with Sony Pictures releasing, handling the worldwide release. Is the 38th movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, also known as the MCU, and is the fourth MCU Spider-Man movie, picking up after Spider-Man No Way Home from 2021. The movie is directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, while Chris McKenna and Eric Sommers wrote the screenplay. Tom Holland returns as Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, with an awesome cast that includes Zendaya, Sadie Sink, Jacob Batalon, John Bernthal, Florence Pugh, Tremel Tillman, Marisa Tomei, and Mark Ruffalo. In this new adventure, Peter is living a much different life, protecting New York City in secret as Spider-Man while trying to stay under the radar. At the same time, he has to deal with a powerful new enemy. And things get even crazier when his spider powers begin changing in unexpected ways that could end up helping him or seriously putting him in danger. Sony had already started planning a fourth MCU Spider Man movie back in August 2019. Then, in November 2021, producer Amy Pascal confirmed that this movie was meant to kick off a brand new Spider Man trilogy with Tom Holland returning as the main star. Development on the story officially got underway the following month, and this time Tom Holland had a much bigger role in shaping the movie than he did with the previous Spider Man films. By February 2023, Chris McKenna and Eric Sommers were back to write the script, and in October 2024, Destin Daniel Cretton officially signed on as the director. The movie's title, Brand New Day, was revealed in March 2025. It takes its name from the famous 2008 Spider Man comics storyline that gave Peter Parker a fresh start and completely changed the direction of his life. The creative team wanted this version of Peter Parker to finally be the classic neighborhood Spider Man that fans have always wanted to see, working alone, relying on himself, and taking on street level crime across New York City instead of dealing with huge world ending events. Before filming even began, fans were excited to learn that John Bernthal would return as Frank Castle, better known as the Punisher, while Mark Ruffalo would once again play Bruce Banner, also known as the Hulk. Production took place between August and December 2025. The crew filmed scenes in Glasgow, Scotland, along with several locations across England. While many of the indoor scenes were shot on sound stages at the famous Pinewood Studios in England, Spider Man Brand New Day had its world premiere at the Dolby Theatre in Hollywood, Los Angeles on July 27, 2026. Just a few days later, it officially hit theaters across the United States on July 31 as part of Phase 6 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The movie got mostly positive reactions from both critics and audiences, with many fans praising Tom Holland's performance, the action scenes, and the fresh direction of the story. It also became a massive box office success, earning around $1.155 billion worldwide. That made it the second highest grossing Spider Man movie ever and the highest grossing movie released in 2026. On top of that, it broke records by earning the biggest opening weekend ever in the United States and Canada, while also delivering the second biggest worldwide opening weekend in movie history. Overall, Spider Man. Brand New Day proved that Spider Man is still one of the biggest and most popular superheroes on the planet, showing that fans are always ready for another amazing adventure with everyone's favorite friendly neighborhood hero. The movie kicks off with Peter Parker, played by Tom Holland, sitting down to write a heartfelt letter to MJ. He hopes that one day he'll finally be able to give it to her and explain everything that happened between them. Ever since Doctor Strange cast the spell that made the whole world forget Peter Parker ever existed, Peter has been living completely on his own. He is now Spider Man full time, spending every day protecting New York City from dangerous criminals like Scorpion, Tombstone, Boomerang, Tarantula, and the ninja group known as The Hand. While fighting crime, he's also working alongside Detective Jean DeWolf. As the years pass, Peter quietly watches MJ and his best friend Ned from a distance as they move on with their lives and attend MIT together. Even though he misses them every single day, he knows they have no memory of who he really is. One day, Spider Man spots a military tank speeding out of control through the streets of Manhattan. At the same time, Frank Castle, also known as the Punisher, is chasing after it. Spider Man stops Frank from getting involved and continues after the tank himself. Unfortunately, the tank crashes straight into the Department of Damage Control before Spidey can stop it. When he opens the tank, expecting to find a criminal inside, he's shocked to discover an elderly woman instead. Suddenly, a mysterious telepath jumps out of the woman's mind and takes control of a nearby security guard. Spider Man notices what's happening and chases after the mysterious person, but he's too late. The telepath secretly changes the prison transport route, making sure Scorpion is taken to Bellevue Hospital instead of the high security prison known as the Raft. Before disappearing, the telepath tells Spider Man there's a bomb hidden inside the tank. Peter can't stop the explosion, but thankfully, everyone inside the building gets evacuated before it goes off. Later, Detective DeWolf tells Spider Man that Scorpion has escaped from Bellevue. Looking for answers, Peter visits a Russian bathhouse where he meets Yelena Belova. She helps him sneak inside after making him leave most of his Spider Man suit behind, although he keeps his mask on. Yelena tells Peter that Damage Control has been attacked 4 different times recently, and whoever is behind the attacks seems to be searching for something called VMAX. Spider Man heads over to Damage Control to investigate for himself. There, he meets the agency's leader, Bill Metzger. Peter quickly notices that members of the Hand are secretly working with Damage Control. Metzger claims he has no idea who's behind the attacks or what VMAX actually is, but Spider Man notices a huge, heavily protected vault inside the building and becomes convinced that whatever the attackers are searching for is hidden inside it. Later, Peter is talking with Detective DeWolf on the phone while walking through a store when he suddenly spots Ned. Curious, he quietly follows him back to the apartment that Ned now shares with MJ, where they're throwing a party. Peter secretly looks around and finds an entire wall filled with Ned's funny Spider Man theories. Ned even believes Spider Man might actually be Flash Thompson or their old teacher, Roger Harrington. He's also built a Spidey tracker app that tries to predict where Spider Man might show up next. Peter finally sees MJ again and gives her the flowers he originally planned to place on Aunt May's grave. But the emotional moment falls apart when he watches another guy kiss MJ heartbroken. Peter quietly leaves and swings back home. Once he gets there, his body suddenly starts going through a painful transformation and he passes out. Peter wakes up outside, wrapped inside a giant cocoon made completely of spider webs. He quickly realizes something has changed. His body is now creating organic webs naturally, making his web shooters useless. He asks his AI assistant, EV, to analyze what's happening. She discovers that Peter's DNA is evolving and that his spider genes are becoming much stronger, causing his body to overload with new abilities and overwhelming sensations. After getting somewhat used to his new powers, Spider Man goes after Scorpion, who's attacking damage control once again. During the fight, Peter starts losing badly until he allows his new spider instincts to completely take over. Suddenly, much stronger and more aggressive, he brutally beats Scorpion and even rips off his mechanical tail. During the battle, he accidentally slams Scorpion into a police car, badly injuring the officer trapped inside. After the fight ends, Peter realizes Scorpion was actually being controlled by the mysterious telepath the whole time. Horrified by how violently he acted, Peter blames himself for losing control. Looking for answers about his changing powers, Peter visits Bruce Banner at a college where Bruce is teaching a physics class. Most of Bruce's students spend the class asking questions about the Avengers instead of science. Once everyone leaves, Peter explains what's happening. Bruce now wears a special inhibitor device that prevents him from transforming into the Hulk, and Peter asks for help building something similar for himself. He also wants to create another device that could stop the telepath from controlling other people. Bruce gives him advice, and Peter heads home to start building both devices. Not long after that, the telepath contacts Peter directly and threatens to go after MJ. Next, Spider Man immediately begins searching the city, tracking everyone who appears to be under mind control. Using his technology, he figures out that the telepath can only control people within a range of about 33 feet. When the villain takes control of a helicopter pilot, Spider Man quickly webs up the helicopter before anyone else gets hurt. Peter rushes to MJ's apartment and convinces her to leave with him before it's too late. While talking on a nearby rooftop, it briefly looks like MJ is finally starting to remember who Spider Man really is. She removes Peter's mask and kisses him, making him believe all her memories have returned. But the emotional moment turns out to be nothing more than another cruel illusion created by the telepath. The villain then forces MJ to walk right off the edge of the building. Spider Man barely catches her in time, but she loses consciousness. Peter gives himself up when the telepath appears in another person's body, but before they escape, he catches a glimpse of the real telepath sitting inside a nearby car. To his surprise, it's actually a teenage girl named Jean Grey. Spider Man brings the unconscious MJ to Frank Castle's heavily trapped hideout. After arguing for a bit, Frank agrees to let MJ stay there where she'll be safe. Peter scans the telepath's face and discovers that nearly every record about her has been erased. The only thing he manages to recover is her full name, Jean Elaine Grey. After MJ suggests a way to stop Peter's inhibitor device from overheating, Peter begins improving it so he can use it against Jean. During this time, Peter and Frank also get into a heated argument because Peter believes Frank has never cared about anyone, not realizing the heartbreaking tragedy Frank suffered when he lost his own family. Soon afterward, Jean launches another attack on damage control. MJ convinces Frank to help Spider Man. As the attack begins, Bill Metzger locks everyone inside a secure room while something starts smashing against the giant vault. Spider Man arrives and discovers that Jean has taken control of Bruce Banner after removing his inhibitor, causing him to transform back into Professor Hulk. Frank tries shooting at Hulk while Spider Man fights to free Bruce's mind. They succeed, but Bruce warns that something inside him has completely broken. Moments later, he transforms into the much more powerful Savage Hulk. Spider Man does everything he can to protect innocent people, even stopping massive chunks of debris from crashing onto the streets below. Eventually, Peter reminds Bruce that they're friends, helping Bruce regain control long enough to calm down. Unfortunately, John then takes control of Frank Castle and forces him to use his explosives to blow open the giant vault. Spider Man rushes inside before Jean can kill Bill Metzger and finally uses his completed inhibitor device to break Jean's control over Frank. Metzger immediately shoots Jean with a tranquilizer dart. Right before passing out, Jean quietly whispers one word, Sarah. Bruce is taken to the hospital, while Metzger thanks Spider-Man for saving everyone inside the building. Damage Control takes Jean into custody. When Spider-Man asks Metzger about the name Sarah, Metzger claims John entered his mind and saw the memory of a coworker named Sarah who had recently died. Back at Frank's hideout, Peter discovers that MJ has found the letter he wrote for her. With no other choice, he finally tells her the truth about who he is and everything they shared before Doctor Strange's spell erased everyone's memories. Peter tells MJ that he still loves her, but she gently admits that she doesn't feel the same because she has absolutely no memory of their relationship. Even though the answer completely breaks Peter's heart, he accepts it. He walks MJ back home, where she introduces him to Ned as if they're meeting for the very first time. Ned is thrilled to finally meet Spider Man in person. During their conversation, MJ casually mentions that she doesn't remember kissing Peter while Jean was controlling her. That's when Peter realizes Metzger lied about Jean seeing his memories. Peter immediately contacts Yelena again. After digging deeper, she discovers that Damage Control intentionally erased almost every record connected to Jean. She also reveals one shocking detail. Sarah wasn't just someone Jean knew, Sarah was actually Jean's sister. Peter instantly realizes John isn't the real threat anymore. She's the one who's in danger. The movie then flashes back to John's childhood. She and her sister Sarah were abandoned by their mother after their mutant abilities started to appear. Sarah taught young John how to safely jump between people's minds and control different bodies. One day, a team of damage control agents led by Bill Metzger arrived to arrest Sarah. John desperately tried to save her sister, but Sarah stopped her, choosing to sacrifice herself instead. Back at damage control headquarters, Bill Metzger has Jean locked into a special chair while scientists test the limits of her telepathic powers. During the experiment, Jean discovers the truth about something called VMAX. She realizes it isn't an object at all. It was connected to the secret experiments that her sister Sarah uncovered before she disappeared. In that heartbreaking moment, Jean finally understands that Sarah didn't survive. Overcome with grief and rage, she removes the device that was suppressing her mutant abilities. Her powers explode across New York City, sending out a massive psychic shockwave that freezes almost everyone in place. The entire city comes to a standstill, including MJ and Ned, who are completely helpless. Frank Castle is one of the few people outside the wave's range, so he grabs a sniper rifle and prepares to end the threat before Jean can cause even more destruction. Meanwhile, Spider Man races to damage control headquarters, but getting inside is anything but easy. John has taken control of the Hands ninjas along with several damage control agents, and they all attack Peter at once. At first, he is overwhelmed by the non stop assault. Realizing he can't keep holding himself back, Peter removes the inhibitor that has been limiting his new abilities. Instead of fighting against the changes happening inside him, he finally embraces them. He accepts that he doesn't have to choose between being Peter Parker or Spider Man. He can be both. With his upgraded powers fully unlocked, Spider Man tears through the enemies in an incredible action sequence before finally reaching John. Inside the main chamber, John traps Bill Metzger with dozens of sharp glass shards floating around him, ready to strike at any second. Outside the building, Frank lines up the perfect sniper shot. Peter doesn't attack Jean. Instead, he does something completely unexpected. He allows Jean to enter his mind, showing her one of his most precious memories with Aunt May. In the memory, May comforts Peter with the same kindness and love she always showed him. As Jean experiences the memory, she imagines herself in Peter's place, hearing Aunt May tell her that she is not alone and that there's still hope. Peter then opens up about the pain of losing someone he loved, helping Jean realize that they both understand what it's like to carry unbearable grief. For the first time, Jean lets go of her anger and chooses to stop fighting. Just as everything seems to be calming down, Frank fires his rifle. Peter reacts instantly, pushing John out of the bullet's path and taking the shot himself. Seriously wounded, Peter collapses to the ground. Refusing to let him die, John uses her incredible psychic powers to keep him alive long enough for help to arrive. Frank rushes over, picks Peter up, and gets him to the hospital as quickly as possible. Across New York City, people gather together, desperately waiting to hear whether Spider Man survived. Peter eventually wakes up in the hospital with Frank sitting beside him. Frank feels guilty for what happened and apologizes for nearly killing his friend. He finally admits that Peter has earned his respect and that he truly considers him a friend. To protect Peter's identity, Frank secretly puts on Spider Man's mask and gloves before standing near the hospital window. So the crowd outside believes Spider Man is recovering. Watching the huge crowd cheer for their hero reminds Peter just how much hope Spider Man gives to people. At the same time, MJ is back at her apartment wearing the black dahlia necklace Peter gave her years ago. Even though she still doesn't remember their relationship, she smiles, hinting that some emotional connection may still remain deep inside. Not long afterward, Jean quietly leaves New York on a bus to start a new chapter of her life. Peter meets with Detective Jean DeWolf, who tells him that Bill Metzger has disappeared and that the police have launched an investigation into everything that happened inside damage control. She also tells Peter she's glad he finally has people he can rely on instead of carrying every burden alone. Before they part ways, she encourages him to take some time to recover from everything he's been through. As Peter walks through the city, he runs into Ned once again. Acting on instinct, Peter performs the secret handshake they used to share. For a brief moment, Ned pauses and looks confused, almost as if forgotten memories are beginning to resurface. It's a small but emotional hint that Doctor Strange's spell may not have erased everything after all. In the post credit scene, Ned checks his homemade Spidey tracker app and notices something strange. The tracker suddenly loses Spider Man's signal on Earth. A few seconds later, the signal reappears far out in deep space, suggesting that Spider Man's next adventure could take him beyond our planet. The movie ends with one final message on the screen: Spider Man will return. Tom Holland, as Peter Parker's Spider Man Tom Holland, returns as the central figure of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's Spider Man saga in a Spider Man Brand New Day. His portrayal of Peter Parker continues the arc established across Spider Man Homecoming, Spider Man Far From Home, and Spider Man No Way Home. In this installment, Parker operates in a world that no longer remembers his existence following Doctor Strange's spell. Holland's performance centers on a more isolated, full time vigilante who dedicates himself entirely to protecting New York City from street level threats while grappling with the personal cost of that anonymity. Holland, born in 1996, first gained widespread recognition for his stage work in Billy Elliot the Musical, before transitioning to film with roles in The Impossible and In the Heart of the Sea. His casting as Spider Man in 2015 marked a pivotal shift for the character in the MCU, emphasizing a younger, more relatable Peter Parker compared to previous cinematic iterations. By the time of Brand New Day, Holland had refined the physicality of the role through extensive stunt training and wire work, enabling more fluid web slinging sequences and combat choreography. The film introduces organic web generation from his wrists, a change that requires Holland to convey both the physical novelty and the psychological impact of evolving powers. His blacked out eyes during moments of lost control and heightened aggression demand a layered physical performance that balances heroism with emerging instability. Holland's involvement extended beyond acting. He contributed to the story development, drawing from his own experiences of maturing in the public eye. The character's transition from high school student to independent adult forms a core emotional through line, with Holland emphasizing selflessness and the consequences of isolation. Interactions with returning and new characters allow him to explore mentorship dynamics, particularly with John Bernthal's Frank Castle, evolving from mutual distrust into a complicated big brother little brother rivalry through on-set improvisation. Holland's established chemistry with co-stars Zendaya and Jacob Batalon remains a foundation, even as the narrative forces those relationships into unfamiliar territory due to the memory wipe. Zendaya as Michelle MJ Jones Watson. Zendaya reprises her role as Michelle MJ Jones Watson, Peter Parker's former classmate and romantic partner, whose memories of him have been erased. In Brand New Day, MJ has graduated from MIT alongside Ned Leeds and shares an apartment with him in New York. She navigates a life that feels incomplete without understanding why, while beginning a new relationship that complicates any potential reconnection with Parker. Zendaya's performance focuses on the character's intelligence, dry wit, and emotional maturity, ensuring MJ retains her distinctive quirks rather than becoming a conventional love interest. Zendaya, born in 1996, rose to prominence through Disney Channel's Shake It Up before establishing herself in prestige television with Euphoria and major film roles in the Dune series, Challengers, and Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Her casting as MJ in the MCU Spider Man films was announced alongside Holland's, and the pair's real life relationship has only heightened public interest in their on screen dynamic. In Brand New Day, Zendaya worked closely with the writers to preserve MJ's individuality after early drafts risked making the character too conventional. The role requires her to portray someone who has moved forward, yet senses a missing piece, creating space for quiet moments of curiosity and guarded openness. When Parker re enters her orbit under a mask or through careful reintroduction, MJ's new boyfriend, played by Iman Esfandi, provides additional tension, forcing Zendaya to balance residual emotional echoes with present day independence. Her scenes with Jacob Batalon's Ned highlight a stable, supportive friendship that contrasts with Parker's solitary existence. Zendaya's ability to convey complex interiority through minimal dialogue proves essential in sequences where MJ processes possession experiences or confronts the letter. Parker left explaining the spell. Sadie Sink, as Jean Grey Sadie Sink, takes on the role of Jean Grey, a young mutant possessing telepathic, telekinetic, and possession abilities. Captured by the Department of Damage Control, John becomes the central antagonistic force, whose powers create an invisible threat that only Spider Man can effectively counter due to his evolving resistance. The film presents an origin distinct from traditional comic depictions, with Jean developing her abilities alongside her sister Sarah rather than through a traumatic car accident. Sink's casting brings a teenage perspective to the villain role, aligning with director Destin Daniel Cretton's desire for a more grounded, isolation themed adversary rather than a fantastical monster. Sink, born in 2002, achieved global recognition as Max Mayfield in Stranger Things, where she demonstrated range from vulnerability to fierce resilience. Additional credits include the whale and stage work, establishing her as a performer capable of intense emotional and physical demands. In Brand New Day, her red hair and youthful presence fueled early speculation about the Jean Grey identity long before official confirmation. Singh's portrayal emphasizes the character's social isolation and rage at institutional captivity, particularly after learning of her sister's fate. Possession sequences require precise physical control as she body hops between characters, including Mac Gargan and Bruce Banner, while later confrontations demand raw power and eventual vulnerability when she enters Parker's mind and witnesses. Memories of Aunt May Olivia Booth Ford appears as Sarah Gray, Jean's older mutant sister, providing crucial backstory through flashbacks and references. Singh's chemistry with Holland in reconciliation scenes hinges on shared experiences of loss and the burden of powers that isolate them from ordinary life. The role marks a significant expansion of mutant presence within the MCU Spider Man series and positions Sync as a key new player in the franchise's evolving landscape. Jacob Batalon as Ned Leeds. Jacob Batalon returns as Ned Leeds. Peter Parker's former best friend, whose memories have also been erased. Having graduated from MIT with MJ, Ned lives with her in New York and has developed the Spidey Tracker app in an attempt to identify and thank the hero who saved him and his classmates years earlier. Batalon's performance captures a young man living a full life yet sensing something incomplete, using the app as a subconscious search for the missing connection to Spider Man. Batalon, born in 1996, first appeared as Ned in Spider Man Homecoming and became a fan favorite for his comic relief, loyalty, and eventual guy in the chair support role. His Filipino American background added representational depth to the supporting cast. In Brand New Day, the character has matured. The high school energy gives way to post college pragmatism, while retaining warmth and curiosity. Scenes of reintroduction with the masked Parker allow Batalon to rediscover the old handshake and friendship dynamics organically. His collaboration with Zendaya's MJ underscores a stable domestic partnership that contrasts with Parker's isolation, providing emotional grounding for the film's themes of reconnection. John Bernthal as Frank Castle Punisher. John Bernthal reprises his role as Frank Castle, the Punisher, bringing a darker, more lethal edge to the street level conflict. Following the events of the Disney Plus special The Punisher, one last kill, Castle has largely sworn off human connection and operates from a converted industrial barge houseboat named Golden Girl that serves as both command center and safe house. His lethal methods initially clash with Spider Man's non lethal approach, particularly during a tank rampage sequence, but the two form an uneasy alliance that evolves into a mentorship dynamic. Bernthal, born in 1976, originated the live action MCU Punisher in the Netflix Daredevil series and later headlined The Punisher. His intense physical style and military consultation, supported on set by United States Army Special Forces member Colton Hill, ensure authenticity within the film's PG-13 constraints. Producer Kevin Feige noted a different tonality compared to previous appearances, focusing less on extreme violence and more on psychological state and reluctant guidance. Holland and Bernthal improvised extensively, developing a rivalry that softens into mutual understanding of shared trauma and isolation. Castle's battle van appears in live action for the first time, and his equipment proves instrumental when Parker and MJ use the hideout to develop inhibitors. Bernthal's presence elevates the film's exploration of different approaches to justice and the personal toll of vigilantism. Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner Hulk. Mark Ruffalo returns as Bruce Banner Hulk, now a professor of quantum mechanics at Empire State University. Parker seeks Banner's expertise regarding his evolving powers and the inhibitor technology that suppresses the Hulk persona using siRNA. Banner's own inhibitor fails during a possession sequence, causing a regression to the uncontrollable Savage Hulk last fully seen in Avengers. Infinity War, Ruffalo, born in 1967, has portrayed Banner across the MCU since the Avengers, evolving the character from the solitary scientist of earlier films through Smart Hulk in Avengers, Endgame, and appearances in Shang-Chi and The Legend of the Ten Rings and She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. His dual performance requires seamless transitions between the measured academic and the rage-driven Hulk. In Brand New Day, the character provides scientific grounding for Parker's mutations while contributing to large-scale action when possessed and later subdued. Ruffalo's involvement reinforces the film's connection to broader MCU continuity and offers Parker a rare ally who understands the burden of uncontrollable power. Florence Pugh as Yelena Belova, Black Widow Florence Pugh, appears as Yelena Belova, the Black Widow operative who uses a New York bathhouse as her informal office. Spider-Man consults her for intelligence on Department of Damage Control activities and the mysterious VMAX targeted by the telepathic threat. The film confirms Yelena's inheritance of the Black Widow mantle previously held by her late adoptive sister, Natasha Romanoff. Pugh, born in 1996, joined the MCU in Black Widow and expanded the role through Thunderbolts and related projects. Her dry humor, combat proficiency, and independent streak make her a natural information broker for the isolated Parker. Brief but impactful scenes allow Pugh to deliver exposition with characteristic wit while advancing the investigation into DODC secrets and Sarah Gray's fate. Her presence ties Brand New Day to the larger network of street level and spy adjacent heroes within the MCU. Tremel Tillman as William Bill Metzger. Tremel Tillman portrays William Bill Metzger, director of the Department of Damage Control. Metzger oversees the containment of superpowered individuals and initially enlists Spider Man's help against the invisible telepathic threat while concealing critical information about Jean and Sarah Gray. His eventual disappearance follows the exposure of unethical experiments. Tillman, known for Severance and Mission, Impossible, The Final Reckoning, brings authoritative presence and subtle duplicity to the bureaucratic antagonist role. Metzger represents institutional overreach and the dangers of weaponizing or suppressing mutant abilities. providing a human face to the systemic obstacles. Parker confronts Michael Mando as Mac Gargan Scorpion. Michael Mando returns as Mac Gargan, the Scorpion, previously captured in Spider Man Homecoming. Now equipped with armored suit and mechanized tail, Gargan becomes a vessel for Jean Grey's possession during early escape attempts from DODC custody. Mando's physical performance conveys both the criminal's residual menace and the puppet like control exerted by the telepath. Marvin Jones III as Lonnie Lincoln Tombstone. Marvin Jones III portrays Lonnie Lincoln Tombstone, a crime boss with albinism, near indestructible skin, and superhuman strength. Jones previously voiced a version of the character in Spider Man Into the Spider Verse. The live action interpretations expand Spider Man's rogues gallery with a formidable street level threat whose presence underscores the film's focus on grounded criminal elements alongside mutant powers. Lisa Colon Zayas as Detective John DeWolf. Lisa Colon Zayas plays Detective John DeWolf of the NYPD. Known for her work in The Bear, Colon Zayas brings grounded procedural energy to the law enforcement perspective on Spider Man's activities and the broader chaos caused by possessed individuals and DODC operations. Marissa Tomei as May Parker. Marissa Tomei appears as Aunt May through flashback sequences. Her presence provides emotional anchors for Parker, particularly in the pivotal mind sharing moment with Jean Grey, where memories of May's acceptance and love help bridge the gap between hero and antagonist. Tomei's earlier performances across the trilogy establish May as a moral compass whose loss continues to shape Parker's isolation and sense of responsibility. Naomi Watts as Evie voice. Naomi Watts provides the voice of Evie, an artificial intelligence associated with Parker's technology or support systems. Watts' distinctive vocal performance adds a layer of technological companionship to the otherwise solitary hero. Keith David as narrator of Spider Video. Voice. Keith David lends his authoritative voice to a Spider Man related video narration, contributing to the film's media and public perception elements surrounding the anonymous hero. Iman Esfandi as MJ's boyfriend, Paul Rabin. Iman Esfandi appears as MJ's new romantic interest, creating external pressure on any potential reconnection between MJ and Parker. The role requires subtle presence that reinforces MJ's independence while heightening Parker's sense of displacement. Olivia Booth Ford as Sarah Gray. Olivia Booth Ford portrays Sarah Gray, Jean's mutant sister, whose fate at the hands of the DODC drives much of Jean's rage and the film's conspiracy elements. Her appearances, largely through memory and reference, deepen the emotional stakes of the sister relationship and the institutional betrayal. Sabrina Guevara as Sheila Rivera. Sabrina Guevara reprises her role as Sheila Rivera, the mayor of New York City, introduced in Daredevil. Born Again. Her presence connects the film to the broader straight level MCU continuity and local political response to superhuman activity. Billy Clements as Ramrod Billy Clements appears as Ramrod, a cyborg villain, adding further depth to the criminal underworld elements, intersecting with the primary telepathic threat. Additional supporting players fill out the ensemble, including numerous Department of Damage Control agents, New York civilians, partygoers, and background figures who populate the city's response to Spider Man's activities and the cascading effects of Jean Grey's powers. Stunt doubles, particularly for Holland and Ruffalo, enable the film's demanding action sequences involving web slinging, Hulk level strength, and large scale destruction. The casting of Spider Man, Brand New Day, deliberately balances continuity with expansion. Returning performers such as Holland, Zendaya, Batalon, Mando, Ruffalo, Bernthal, Tomei, and Guevara maintain emotional and narrative threads from previous MCU entries. New additions Sync as the central mutant antagonist, Tillman as the institutional face of control, Poe in an intelligence broker capacity, Jones as Tombstone, Colon Zayas as DeWolf, and the various supporting players. Introduce fresh dynamics, mutant themes, and street level complexity. The ensemble supports a story focused on isolation, evolving identity, institutional overreach, and the possibility of reconnection, with each performer contributing specific textures of vulnerability, menace, loyalty, or authority that collectively define the film's tone and thematic reach. Spider Man, Brand New Day 2026, Production Development and Pre Production Spider Man. Brand New Day is positioned as the 38th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the fourth entry in the MCU's dedicated Spider Man series, following Homecoming 2017, Far From Home 2019, and No Way Home 2021. That earlier trilogy was itself the product of an unusual interstudio arrangement. Sony Pictures retains the film rights to Spider Man and his supporting cast of characters, while Marvel Studios, a subsidiary of Disney, has periodically partnered with Sony to fold the character into the larger Avenger centered continuity, an arrangement that has always been more fragile and commercially contingent than Marvel Studios' relationship with characters it fully owns outright. The 2019 dispute that briefly threatened to end that partnership and the swift fan backlash that followed underscored just how central the character had become to both companies' broader plans, and it set the tone for how carefully both studios would manage expectations heading into a fourth collaboration beyond the central roster of returning and newly introduced characters. Several smaller casting details rounded out the film's world. Keith David was cast in a role the studio kept undisclosed through the bulk of the marketing campaign, fueling ongoing fan speculation alongside the mystery surrounding Sadie Singh's character. Eman Esfandi was cast as a new love interest for Zendaya's MJ, introducing a wrinkle to the Peter MJ dynamic given the pair's history and the emotional weight of Parker no longer being remembered by the person he once dated. Tony Revolori and Martin Starr, who play Flash Thompson and Roger Harrington respectively across the earlier trilogy, do not appear as active characters in the new film, but show up in photographs within it. A small continuity touch, acknowledging their place in Parker's life, even though the story's premise keeps most of his old classmates and acquaintances at arm's length. The road to a fourth Tom Holland led Spider Man movie stretches back years before a single frame of Brand New Day was shot. Reports that Sony was already sketching out a follow up to Spider Man. No Way Home surfaced in the summer of 2019, around the same period that Sony and Marvel Studios were finishing their collaboration on that third film. That same month, a dispute between the two companies over how to structure their production partnership became public, with Sony announcing it intended to make the next Spider Man picture without Marvel Studios boss Kevin Feige attached. The backlash from fans was immediate and loud, and within weeks, the two studios were back at the negotiating table. By the end of September 2019, they had reached a new arrangement that let Feige and Marvel Studios produce No Way Home for Sony, with Amy Pascal continuing on as the film's other lead producer. Once No Way Home arrived in theaters, its ending effectively guaranteed there would be more to tell. Tom Holland said in February 2021, before the third film had even opened, that it represented the conclusion of his existing contract, though he added that he would happily return to the role if asked. Zendaya, who plays Michelle MJ Jones Watson, said in the middle of that year that she genuinely did not know whether another MCU Spider Man film was in the cards. By October 2021, Holland was describing No Way Home as the capstone of the story that began with Homecoming, suggesting that any future Spider Man movie would need a different tone and approach than the trilogy fans had just watched. Conclude, Holland's feelings about continuing in the role were complicated. That November, he admitted uncertainty about whether he should keep playing Spider Man at all, telling interviewers he'd feel he had done something wrong if he were still suited up in his 30s. He even floated the idea of a film centered on Miles Morales rather than Peter Parker. Pascal, for her part, made clear she wanted to keep working with Holland and confirmed that early development on a new trilogy was getting underway. The Hollywood Reporter noted around this time that Sony didn't have a formal plan in place yet for further Spider Man films, but hoped to keep collaborating with Marvel Studios. Holland, meanwhile, teased that there were exciting things being discussed without offering specifics, and by December 2021, he'd landed on a more settled position. He had accomplished everything he wanted with the character and was prepared to walk away if a fourth film didn't materialize, even if that outcome would sadden him. The turning point came from Feige and Pascal themselves. Around the release of No Way Home, Pascal expressed hope that the Sony Disney partnership would endure, and Feige promised that the friction that had briefly derailed the third film's production wouldn't repeat itself. He confirmed that Holland Parker would return to the MCU eventually and revealed that conversations about the next chapter story had already begun among Feige, Pascal, Sony, and Disney. Crucially, that story was described as a direct continuation of the momentous decision Parker makes at the end of No Way Home, asking Doctor Strange to erase the world's memory of him. Momentum built gradually through 2022. When series director John Watts left Marvel Studios' Fantastic Four reboot in April of that year, Sony was still operating on the assumption that Watts would return to direct the fourth Spider Man film. The following month, Sony chairman and CEO Tom Rothman said he was hopeful the whole group, Watts included, along with Holland and Zendaya, would reassemble. By February 2023, Feige confirmed that writers had begun developing a story built around some genuinely big ideas, but the 2023 Writers Guild of America strike halted that work just a few months later. Pascal said publicly that the project would pick back up once the strike ended, and Holland confirmed that meetings he'd been part of regarding the story's direction and ambitions had likewise been paused. The strike concluded in late September 2023, and Holland confirmed by November that talks had resumed. His feelings toward doing a fourth film remained mixed even then. He'd come to see No Way Home as an ideal send off for his version of the character and was hesitant about diluting that, saying he'd only sign on if the new film could genuinely do justice to Spider Man. In his pitch meetings with the studios, Holland made a point of relaying what he'd observed fans saying online in the aftermath of No Way Home, reasoning that understanding audience appetite mattered since the films are ultimately made for them. One of his own contributions to the story took root early. He pitched the idea that Parker's powers should go through a kind of adolescent transformation, comparing it to puberty. The creative team liked this kernel enough to build much of the film's arc around it. A separate idea, giving Parker a pet dog, was floated and dropped almost immediately, according to Holland. Industry reporting through early 2024 filled in more of the picture. Journalist Jeff Snyder wrote that Marvel Studios was weighing directors Drew Goddard and Justin Lin for the job, that returning writers Chris McKenna and Eric Sommers were back on the project after working on all three prior Holland led films, and that both Holland and Zendaya were expected to reprise their roles. Snyder also reported that filming was targeted for the fall of 2024, a timeline that reportedly pushed back production on the third season of Zendaya's HBO series Euphoria to accommodate her schedule. By March 2024, however, Variety reported the script was still being refined and that no director or filming date had been locked in. Holland addressed the delay the following month, saying the studios were giving the writers room to work after the strike, while reaffirming that he would always want to keep making Spider Man films. He simply wanted the next one done right, in a way that honored what the trilogy had built. He noted that this time around, he'd been brought into the creative process much earlier than on any previous installment, giving him more influence over where the story went. By July 2024, Feige said a script draft was close to being finalized, while also acknowledging that Watt's increasingly busy schedule with other projects might keep him from directing. Watts ultimately passed on the film entirely. With the director's chair open, the studios turned their attention to alternatives, and Destin Daniel Cretton, who had directed Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings for Marvel Studios in 2021, emerged as the top candidate by September 2024, entering early talks for the job. Cretton already had history with Marvel. His 2021 overall deal included a commitment to direct a Shang-Chi sequel and to develop the Disney Plus series Wonder Man. And in mid 2022, he additionally been tapped to direct the ensemble crossover film that was then known as Avengers, the Kang Dynasty. Scheduling conflicts forced him to step away from that Avengers project in November 2023. It was later reworked into what became Avengers Doomsday. With Cretton newly available, Marvel Studios treated the fourth Spider Man film as a higher priority than a Shang-Chi sequel. That same September, reporting confirmed McKenna and Sommers were writing the script, that Holland and Zendaya were in talks to return, and that filming was expected to start in early 2025. Snyder additionally reported a targeted 2026 release and raised questions about how substantial Zendaya's part in the film would be, given her packed 2025 schedule shooting Euphoria and Dune, Part 3, a month later. In October 2024, an unrelated casting decision reshaped the whole production calendar. Holland was cast in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. He asked Sony to push the Spider Man film start date back by 6 months so he could shoot Nolan's project first, and the studio agreed out of respect for both Holland and Nolan. Holland later said he believed this half year delay indirectly brought Cretton onto the project, since the director hadn't felt he had enough time to properly prepare the film under the original schedule. Around the same period, Holland described reading an early draft of the script alongside Zendaya with excitement tempered by a sense that further work was still needed. He acknowledged the challenge of fitting a Spider Man film into the broader shape of the MCU's ongoing slate, calling the logistics demanding but achievable given the team assembled to solve them. He soon confirmed that filming would begin sometime in mid 2025. Shortly after these comments, both Holland and Cretton were formally confirmed as attached to the project, and the film received an official release date of July 24, 2026. During the additional 6 months created by the schedule shift, screenwriter Justin Kuritzkes came about to rework the script alongside Cretton, a natural fit since Kuritzkes had already collaborated with both Zendaya and Sony on the 2024 film Challengers. Snyder offered another update in November 2024, reporting that filming had slipped further to late 2025 or early 2026, and speculating that the release could even move to 2027. Part of the reasoning was that Sony didn't want the film competing in the same calendar year as the animated feature Spider Man. Beyond the Spider Verse, which was targeting a 2026 release at the time, that film was ultimately pushed to 2027, resolving the conflict. A month after that report, Snyder offered more specifics. Filming would run from June to October 2025, threaded between Zendaya's commitments to Euphoria's third season and Dune, Part 3, and her role in Brand New Day had reportedly been trimmed significantly to accommodate the scheduling squeeze, compounded further by her part in the Odyssey. Snyder's December report also claimed that alien symbiotes would factor into the script, that a new set of classmates for Parker would be introduced, that Sacha Baron Cohen would appear as Mephisto, reprising the role from the finale of the Disney Plus series Ironheart, and that Charlie Cox would return as Matt Murdock Daredevil. Cox personally denied involvement in October 2025, and by May 2026, journalist Brandon Davis reported that Cox wasn't expected to appear in the finished film after all. Concrete details firmed up in February 2025. Filming was confirmed to begin in London that summer, and the release date shifted a week later to July 31, 2026, specifically to create more distance from the Odyssey's own release earlier that month. At this stage, Variety still describes Zendaya's involvement as uncertain, while Deadline Hollywood reported she would indeed return, though her deal hadn't yet been finalized. The following month, Sadie Sink joined the cast in a substantial role, arriving on the heels of speculation that she might instead be cast as the X-Men character Jean Grey somewhere in the MCU. Sink had previously worked with Cretton on 2017's The Glass Castle. The secrecy surrounding exactly who Sink was playing became something of a running story in its own right. With new fan theories reportedly emerging on a near weekly basis, Sony used its CinemaCon panel at the end of March 2025 to officially unveil the title Spider Man Brand New Day, borrowed from the 2008 comic book storyline of the same name that reset Spider Man's status quo in the comics. Holland, appearing via video message, explained the title's relevance by framing the film as a fresh start following the events of No Way Home. He later elaborated that the word rebirth captured his feelings about the project, less a fourth installment in an existing franchise and more like the opening chapter of something new. Cretton echoed that framing, describing the film as the start of a new era for the character and previewing a tonal shift away from the earlier trilogy. Holland went further, suggesting the new film would carry a more mature tone than any previous MCU Spider Man movie, comparing its emotional register to the experience of being a teenager. Around this same CinemaCon appearance, Zendaya and Jacob Batalon, who plays Ned Leeds, were both confirmed as returning, and Lisa Colon-Zayas joined the cast in May in the role of a police detective. Snyder also reported that the events of Brand New Day would unfold concurrently with Avengers Doomsday and predicted correctly, as it turned out, that Holland's Spider Man would not appear in that Avengers film as a result. June 2025 brought further clarity. Zendaya's and Batalon's returns were formally confirmed, though how large their roles would be remained unclear at the time. John Bernthal was revealed to be reprising his MCU role as Frank Castle, the Punisher, a character he'd previously played across multiple pieces of Marvel television content. Holland and Bernthal had a history together dating back to the 2017 film Pilgrimage, and each had reportedly helped the other during the casting process for their respective MCU roles. Industry analysts, including the Hollywood Reporter's Boris Kitt, suggested Bernthal's casting signaled the film would lean into a more grounded, street level tone, while also raising an obvious tension. How would a famously violent, R rated character like the Punisher fit inside a PG-13 Spider-Man movie? Feige addressed this directly, saying the character would carry a different tonal register in Brand New Day than in his prior harder edge MCU appearances. Holland acknowledged the same concern and said the filmmaking team worked to keep Castle authentic to fans' expectations while finding creative workarounds for his more explicit habits, including in one memorable gag, having Spider-Man web the Punisher's mouth shut whenever he tries to curse. Bernthal, for his part, said it mattered to him. Holland and Cretton that this portrayal feel continuous with the character as depicted in the Disney Plus special The Punisher, One Last Kill, which arrived earlier in 2026 and explores Castle's psychological state heading into the events of Brand New Day. Feige framed the larger creative thesis behind the film around a specific promise made at the end of No Way Home, that audiences would finally get to see Holland's Parker function as a proper Spider Man, operating independently and handling street level crime rather than being swept up in universe ending stakes. He described Parker as living a modest, somewhat isolated existence, camped out in a small apartment, listening to a police scanner, using his abilities responsibly on a local scale. This narrower focus is what pushed Marvel to introduce heroes from other corners of New York's underworld that Holland's Spider Man hadn't previously crossed paths with, the Punisher Chief among them. Feige noted that the character actually made his comic book debut in a Spider Man title, The Amazing Spider Man Volume 1, issue Assistem 129 from February 1974. He also revealed that Cretton had assembled a wall of 8 or 9 classic comic covers in the art department that the production intended to recreate as visual homages throughout the film, including that same Punisher debut issue, Spider Man's original 1962 debut in Amazing Fantasy Issue 15, which shows him swinging through the city with a civilian passenger, a 1974 issue depicting a fight with Tarantula, a 1981 issue featuring Ramrod, a 1991 issue featuring Boomerang, and a 1994 issue showing Spider Man struck by Scorpion's mechanical tail. Holland also spoke about the narrative complications created by Doctor Strange's memory erasing spell from the end of No Way Home, calling it a fascinating but logistically thorny problem to write around, particularly regarding how it affects people close to Parker, like MJ and Ned. He explained the internal logic the filmmakers settled on. People still remember Spider Man as a figure and recall their interactions with him. They simply no longer connect those memories to Peter Parker specifically. One person notably is exempt from this effect. Holland identified one of the film's central themes as the difficulty of balancing a professional calling with a personal life, embodied in Parker's choice to bury the trauma of being forgotten by throwing himself entirely into being Spider Man rather than confronting his civilian identity. Holland argued this prevents Parker from recognizing that the person he is off duty is precisely what makes him a hero worth loving. He drew a modern parallel to young people retreating into their phones in the evening rather than engaging with the people around them, suggesting the film's themes of isolation and avoidance were meant to resonate beyond the superhero framework. Coordination extended beyond the film itself. The creative teams behind Brand New Day and the Disney Plus series Daredevil. Born Again stayed in regular contact to make sure story beats affecting shared characters, including the Punisher and the character Sheila Rivera, landed consistently across both projects. Brad Winderbaum, who heads Marvel Television, said the two projects deliberately carry different tones but were built to visibly share the same fictional world. Rumors that Mark Ruffalo would reprise his role as Bruce Banner Hulk circulated ahead of filming, and his casting was confirmed once production began in August 2025. Reporters Boris Kitt and Aaron Couch noted that Ruffalo's involvement only solidified relatively late, as the script came together just before cameras rolled, and pointed out that each of the three prior MCU Spider Man films had featured one major crossover co star as part of the Sony Marvel arrangement. Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man in Homecoming, Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury in Far From Home, and Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange in No Way Home. They observed that Brand New Day was unusual in stacking two such crossover figures at once, with both Bernthal and Ruffalo aboard. Ruffalo had also previously made a brief cameo appearance in Cretton's Shang-Chi. Holland had spoken in the past about wanting to see Spider Man team up with the Hulk on screen, citing a comic book image of the pair that stuck with him and expressing hope that the dynamic could carry a big brother, little brother energy. Also confirmed that August, Michael Mando's return as Mac Gargan's Scorpion, continuing a thread first teased in Homecoming's mid credit scene. The choice of title generated its own wave of commentary once it was unveiled at CinemaCon. Several entertainment writers pointed out the pointed symmetry between the film's name and the comic book storyline it borrows from. Brand New Day ran in the comics starting in 2008 as a direct follow up to the controversial 2007-08 storyline One More Day, in which Peter Parker strikes a bargain with the demonic entity Mephisto to save his Aunt May's life at the cost of erasing his marriage to Mary Jane Watson from continuity. The storyline effectively reset large portions of the character's status quo and relationships, a move that proved deeply divisive among longtime readers. Commentators drew an obvious parallel to the MCU's own version of events, in which Doctor Strange's spell at the end of No Way Home functions as a comparable reset button, erasing Parker's identity from the world's memory. Comic book. Com's Diego Peralta specifically wondered aloud whether the film might adapt elements of the One More Day bargain directly, including the Mephisto deal to resurrect Aunt May, who dies in No Way Home, or whether the title was simply meant more loosely as a reference to Parker's fresh start in life rather than a direct adaptation of that specific comic arc. Screen Rant's Kevin Erdman took a more critical angle, noting that both the One More Day and Brand New Day comic storylines had been contentious with readers specifically because they undid years of the characters' earned growth and long standing relationships. He suggested the film could draw on the same broad narrative shape without repeating that particular misstep, provided it found a way to deliver a reset that still respected the character's development rather than erasing it wholesale. This tension between homage and repetition became one of the more persistent threads of pre release commentary and speculation, running alongside separate questions about how directly the story of Avengers Doomsday, unfolding concurrently in the same period of the MCU timeline, might bleed into Brand New Day's own plot. On the design side, costume designer Sanja Milkovich Hayes returned from No Way Home and other MCU productions, alongside production designer Charles Wood, another MCU veteran. Holland was personally involved in shaping the new Spider Man suit, focused on grounding its design in story justification rather than pure aesthetics. He and the design team studied which details fans responded to most strongly in the suits worn by Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield in their respective Spider Man film series, incorporating elements like a lowered belt and lowered boots to visually lengthen the torso and legs. Holland described the new suit's construction as fundamentally different from any Spider Man costume he'd worn before, prioritizing comfort and flexibility. The design builds directly on the suit. Parker is shown assembling at the very end of No Way Home, a costume the earlier film script explains he built after observing both Maguire's and Garfield's versions of the hero during that film's multiverse crossover. Holland enjoyed the narrative logic of Parker essentially looking up to his alternate universe counterparts as mentors, borrowing small details from their suits, the way a younger sibling might imitate an older one, a dynamic made more poignant now that Parker no longer has ties to the Avengers and is designing everything himself. That self reliance extends to the film's technology. Without access to Tony Stark's resources, Parker builds his own gadgets, including an AI assistant called Evie and a homemade fabrication device that Cretan likened to a 3D printer on steroids. Filming principal photography began on August 3, 2025, in Glasgow, Scotland, under the working title Blue Oasis. Brett Pavlak, a frequent collaborator of Cretan's, returned as cinematographer. The production had originally hoped to start shooting in early 2025 before the 6-month delay tied to Holland's commitment to The Odyssey pushed things back. That Nolan production left its mark on Holland's approach to Brand New Day. He said he was inspired by Nolan's disciplined, well prepared filmmaking style and pushed to bring similar rigor to the Spider Man set, insisting each day's work be mapped out in advance rather than figured out on the fly. His growing creative authority on the project also showed up in smaller moments. At one point, he felt confident enough to ask Cretan and the producers to stop filming a scene with Zendaya that he believed needed to be rewritten before it could work. The Glasgow shoot was scheduled to run roughly 2 weeks and made use of locations across the city centre, including Merchant City, George Square, and Trongate, all standing in for New York City streets and providing the backdrop for one of the film's major action set pieces. Holland was especially energized to be back doing location work, contrasting it with No Way Home, which had been largely confined to sound stages due to pandemic era production restrictions. He said he was glad fans got to witness the start of filming alongside the cast and crew. The Jackie Chan stunt team, which had also worked on Shang-Chi and The Legend of the Ten Rings, coordinated the film's fight choreography. Eagle-eyed observers of the Glasgow set spotted armored vehicles bearing a red demon insignia, which outlets like Total Film speculated might tie to the Inner Demons gang from the comics and its leader, Mr. Negative, though this connection was never confirmed by the studio. Separately, a rhinoceros shaped reference bust spotted on set fueled speculation about the villain Rhino potentially appearing, again without official confirmation. Banthal's scenes were scheduled to shoot back to back with his work on The Punisher, One Last Kill, which wrapped filming that August. Additional filming for Brand New Day took place at Brookwood Cemetery in Surrey, England on August 7, 2025. Around the same time, the Glasgow shoot was extended by several days through August 18 to accommodate filming of a promotional commercial. Tremel Tillman joined the cast toward the end of August. A longtime fan of the superhero genre, he had reportedly been eager to land a role in one for years and was thrilled at the opportunity Brand New Day provided. September saw the production shift primarily to soundstage work at Pinewood Studios in Buckinghamshire, England. At the start of the month, Ruffalo indicated he was still waiting on details about his role and hadn't yet seen a script, underscoring how late breaking his involvement in the project really was. In early to mid September, location shooting also took place at Battersea Park in London. On September 19, Holland suffered a mild concussion while performing a stunt on the Pinewood set. Filming there paused for about 10 days while he recovered, with the production determining it couldn't reasonably shoot around his remaining scenes. Reports at the time indicated this pause was not expected to affect the film's release date, and it ultimately did not. Also, in late September 2025, Marvin Jones III was confirmed to be playing the crime boss Tombstone, having previously voiced a different animated version of the character in Sony's 2018 film Spider Man Into the Spider Verse. Filming subsequently moved to Phantom House in Basingstoke, England, initially using one of Holland's stunt doubles before Holland himself joined the Basingstoke shoot in early October alongside Michael Mando. Later in October, Holland, Sink, and Ruffalo were spotted filming at Senate House in London. Early November brought filming to Ravenscourt Park, also in London, and throughout the rest of the month, the production shot extensively at HM Prison Dorchester in Dorset. One of the more technically demanding aspects of the shoot involved recreating those classic comic book cover images that Cretan had pinned to his art department wall. These sequences were filmed at 420 frames per second, an extremely high frame rate that Cretan described as nearly impossible for a performer to hold a precise pose through. Despite that difficulty, he singled out Holland's work, recreating the cover of Spider Man Adventures 2, the one depicting Scorpion's tail strike, noting that Holland nailed the intended pose within just 2 or 3 takes, which Cretan took as a testament to the level of physical control Holland has developed over his own body after years of stunt heavy filming. Separately, Brand New Day became the first film shot with specific sequences designed for the ScreenX format from the outset. The technology's manufacturer, CJ4DP Lex, sent a crew to set specifically to capture footage intended for the side screens that create ScreenX's panoramic viewing experience. Throughout the shoot, the production leaned heavily on practical location work rather than confining itself to controlled soundstage environments. A deliberate choice that Holland connected back to his enthusiasm for returning to the on the ground filmmaking style of the original Homecoming shoot. Glasgow's doubling for New York City drew some local attention in the Scottish press, with residents and passers-by able to catch glimpses of the production dressing familiar city center streets with American signage, taxis, and storefronts during the 2 week location stint. The extension of the Glasgow schedule into late August, driven by the need to also capture a separate branded commercial tie in, reflected the scale of the marketing apparatus being built around the film, even while the movie itself was still in the earlier stages of production. Later, the shift to Pinewood Studios for the bulk of September's interior and stage based work allowed the production to construct and control environments, including elements of Parker's apartment and other recurring interior sets that would have been far more difficult to achieve on location. The concussion Holland sustained on the Pinewood set in mid September, while relatively minor in medical terms, was serious enough to halt filming around his specific scenes for roughly 10 days, illustrating how central his continuous presence was to the shooting schedule, with virtually every scene involving either Parker or Spider Man requiring Holland on set. The production had comparatively little flexibility to work around his absence, the way a film with a larger, more evenly distributed ensemble cast might have. Cretan announced on December 19, 2025, that principal photography had wrapped, calling the experience of directing the film one of the defining opportunities of his career. Holland was similarly effusive, describing the shoot as the most creatively fulfilling filmmaking experience of his life and crediting Cretan with delivering what he considers the strongest Spider Man film made to date. Post production reporting from January 2026 offered a window into how the production was managed behind the scenes. Deadline Hollywood Justin Kroll wrote that Kevin Feige had spent the prior year almost entirely focused on Avengers, Doomsday and its sequel Avengers, Secret Wars, leaving Amy Pascal to oversee much of the day to day production work on Brand New Day. Longtime Spider Man franchise producer Avi Arad and producer Rachel O'Connor rounded out the producing team alongside Feige and Pascal. Editing was handled by Nat Sanders and Gina Sansom, both of whom had prior ties to Cretan's other work. Sanders having cut Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and Sansom having worked on the Disney Plus series Wonder Man. A distinctive editorial choice appears in the film's opening moments. The Marvel Studios logo sequence incorporates archival footage from the earlier MCU Spider Man films, reframed as memories that Parker's own friends, MJ and Ned among them, no longer consciously share with him, a quiet visual reinforcement of the film's central premise before the story even properly begins. Visual effects work was distributed across a large roster of houses, including Sony Pictures Imageworks, Frame Store, Industrial Light and Magic, Rise FX, Cantina Creative, Soho VFX, and SDFX Studios. A breadth of vendors typical of a modern MCU tentpole, reflecting the sheer volume of digital work required across the film's action set pieces, its evolving powers transmission sequences, and its high frame rate comic cover recreations. Jerome Chen served as the film's visual effects supervisor, with David Bosco producing the visual effects. Sony Pictures Imageworks, as the studio's in house effects house, has handled visual effects work across the majority of the studio's prior Spider Man films, giving it a continuity of institutional experience with the character's specific effects needs, from the physics of his webbing to the texture and movement of the suit itself, that outside vendors brought on for individual sequences would need to match. Some post production work overlapped with the promotional calendar. In April 2026, Holland confirmed additional photography was taking place in London, explaining that the goal was to sharpen the film's comedic beats and rework how one of its villain storylines unfolded. He was careful to frame these changes as refinements rather than fixes, saying the film already worked well before the additional shooting and that the goal was simply to add icing on the cake. Separately, later reporting around the audience score rollout indicated that Holland, Zendaya, and Batalon had pushed back on an early test screening influenced cut of the film, that the trio felt compromised their creative vision, advocating instead for edits that stayed closer to what they'd originally set out to make, a dynamic that ultimately shaped the version that reached theaters. Music: Michael Giacchino, the composer behind every prior MCU Spider Man film score to date, was confirmed in December 2025, around the same time production wrapped, to be returning for Brand New Day, continuing his run as the franchise's musical voice across the Holland era. His involvement meant the film would carry forward the thematic material and musical identity established across Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home, giving the series a consistent sonic through line, even as the story itself pivoted toward a more grounded, character driven register. Giacchino's central Spider Man theme also made a notable early appearance outside the film proper. When Sony released its first extended look at Holland in the new costume in August 2025, commentators pointed out that the accompanying footage was scored using Giacchino's established MCU Spider Man theme, offering audiences an audible signal of continuity even before any story details had been revealed. Giacchino's return was treated by trade press as one of the more reassuring pieces of news to emerge from the production, given how significantly the film's other creative personnel had turned over from the earlier trilogy: a new director in Cretan, a reworked script from Kuritzkes, and an almost entirely fresh slate of co starring characters drawn from different corners of the MCU. His score across the three John Watts directed films had become one of the more recognizable musical signatures in the modern MCU, blending a boyish, propulsive main theme with more textured, emotionally driven material for the characters' quieter, dramatic beats. And composer credits confirmed that Brand New Day would continue building on that same musical identity rather than starting over with an entirely new sound. Given the film's stated ambition to mark a tonal departure from the earlier trilogy, trading the globe-trotting, higher stakes plotting of Far From Home and the multiverse spectacle of No Way Home for a smaller scale, street level story. Giacchino's familiar musical through line functioned as one of the connective threads holding the newly reshaped creative team's work together, offering longtime audiences an anchor of consistency, even as nearly every other behind the camera element of the franchise changed hands. Release: theatrical Spider Man Brand New Day opened in the United States through Sony Pictures, releasing on July 31, 2026. Positioned within Phase 6 of the MCU's ongoing story, the film carries particular technical distinction as the first movie specifically shot with dedicated ScreenX sequences, marketed under CJ4D Felix's Shot for ScreenX branding, and it also received releases in IMAX in select international markets, even though it was notably absent from IMAX screens in the United States. Amazon Prime members were offered early access through preview screenings on July 29, 2 days ahead of the wide release. The film's release date moved twice before landing on July 31. It was first targeted for July 24, 2026, before being pushed back a week specifically to create a 2-week buffer after the Odyssey's opening rather than just one. A decision aimed at avoiding a direct fight over the limited number of IMAX screens, which the Odyssey held exclusively for its first 4 weeks in release. That scheduling flexibility existed partly because Disney had originally penciled in an unspecified Marvel Studios film for that same July date, only to quietly remove it from its release calendar in August 2024, freeing up the slot for Sony to claim for Brand New Day. The marketing rollout leading up to release was extensive and closely tracked by entertainment media. On August 1, 2025, a date informally recognized online as Spider Man Day, Sony released a brief 9-second teaser showing off the new costume, notable for its comics accurate red and blue palette, raised textured webbing, and a faint hexagonal pattern carried over from Holland's earlier suits. Polygon's Michael McWhorter compared the raised webbing to Tobey Maguire's classic costume and described the fabric as glittery and textured, a marked contrast to the sleeker, more technological suits Holland had worn previously. Gizmodo's James Whitbrook noted that the design still retained a metallic blue quality inherited from the suit introduced at the very end of No Way Home. A day later, Sony followed up with a 20-second teaser offering a fuller look. Gizmodo's Justin Carter identified the enlarged chest spider logo as the most significant visual change beyond the webbing texture, while also noting the reappearance of Giacchino's musical theme. Variety's Jordan Moreau felt the completed costume skewed closer to the comics than any of Holland's earlier suits, while the Hollywood Reporter's McKinley Franklin drew comparisons instead to the suits worn by Maguire and Garfield. On August 10, Sony released a behind the scenes recap of the first day of filming. Variety's Jack Dunn remarked that Sony and Marvel had been unusually generous with the volume of material shared about the production up to that point. The first full trailer arrived on March 18, 2026. Sony coordinated an unusual promotional strategy the day before its release, partnering with fans and independent content creators around the world to distribute short trailer clips ahead of the official drop comic book. Com's Tom Bacon compared the approach to the cast announcement livestream Marvel Studios had used to promote Avengers Doomsday the previous year, seeing both as attempts to maximize audience engagement across a full day rather than concentrating attention into a single moment. He appreciated the inclusion of fans in the campaign, but questioned the seemingly haphazard nature of the individual clips, most of which leaned on atmosphere over concrete plot information. Writers at Men's Journal and Bleeding Cool separately likened the rollout to a scavenger hunt. The former felt it created a more interactive experience than Marvel's Doomsday live stream, while the latter was more skeptical of the strategy's execution. Variety's Zach Sharf observed that the trailer's slow motion, moodier, visual aesthetic evoked the sensibilities of director Zack Snyder more than any of the prior MCU Spider Man trailers. Multiple outlets pointed out a direct homage buried in the footage. A shot of Spider Man swinging through the city with a civilian passenger, mirroring the iconic cover of Amazing Fantasy 15, the character's original comic debut. The trailer also drew significant attention for revealing Parker's mutating powers, the organic web shooters, and temporarily blackened eyes, with some commentators speculating this drew from the comic's Six Arms saga, also adapted for the Man Spider storyline in the 1990s animated series or the mid 2000s The Other crossover event. By the numbers, the trailer's debut was a genuine phenomenon. According to market research firm Wave Metrics, cited by Sony, the trailer became the most viewed movie trailer in history, racking up 718, 6 million views within 24 hours. That figure surpassed the previous record holder, Deadpool and Wolverine's 365 million views, in just 8 hours. And it also eclipsed the overall 24-hour trailer viewing record previously set by the video game Grand Theft Auto 6. Wave Metrics later reported that within 4 days, the trailer had crossed 1.1 billion views, making it the first movie trailer of any kind to pass that threshold. Sony chairman Tom Rothman and Holland presented additional footage from the film at CinemaCon that April, A second trailer followed on June 17, 2026. The rap's Casey Loving felt it offered a somewhat clearer window into the film's tightly guarded plot and highlighted the return of Bruce Banner's uncontrolled Savage Hulk persona, a version of the character not seen since Avengers. Infinity War in 2018, as well as narration that appeared to come from Marisa Tomei's May Parker. The trailer also introduced a mysterious hooded figure that many commentators assumed was connected to Sadie Singh's still unrevealed character. Wave Metrics reported that this second trailer collected 598 million views over its first week, making it the second most viewed trailer of all time behind the film's own first trailer. Later that June, Sony screened the film's opening 18 minutes for attendees at the Cineeurope Industry Convention. On June 27, Sony partnered with the pizza chain Little Caesars to build a walk-through replica of Parker's apartment from the film in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, as an interactive fan experience. The installation was packed with Easter eggs tied to the story, including the first public look at Marvin Jones Thathar's tombstone and confirmation of Lisa Colon-Zayas' previously mysterious role, alongside a tie-in promotion for a Spider-Man branded Webberoni pizza. A mock Zillow real estate listing for the fictional apartment was created as an additional marketing gag. On the gaming side, the film's costume, nicknamed the Fresh Start suit, was made available as a free downloadable addition to the 2023 video game Marvel Spider-Man 2 starting July 28, just ahead of the film's theatrical debut. Brand New Day also generated headlines purely on the strength of its pre-release ticket sales, posting the best first-day advance sales of any movie in the 5 years, since No Way Home's roughly $78 million haul back in 2021. Home media, the film's post-theatrical distribution path, was shaped by a set of streaming agreements Sony struck years before the movie was even in production. Back in April 2021, Sony signed separate deals with Netflix and Disney, covering its full theatrical slate from 2022 through 2026, governing where those films would land once their theatrical and traditional home entertainment windows closed. Under that original arrangement, Netflix held exclusive pay one window streaming rights, typically an 18-month exclusivity period for a set of territories, an arrangement that had already applied to No Way Home and was expected to extend to future Spider Man films. Disney, meanwhile, held pay to window rights, meaning the films would eventually stream on Disney Plus and Hulu and could air across Disney's broadcast and cable networks once Netflix's exclusivity window lapsed. That framework was updated shortly before Brand New Day's release. In January 2026, Sony and Netflix announced a revised agreement expanding Netflix's pay one window rights from a limited set of markets, previously just the United States, Germany, and Southeast Asia, to a fully global footprint. The new terms were set to begin rolling out later in 2026 as individual territorial rights became available, with the agreement reaching full global implementation by early 2029. That timeline means Brand New Day's own streaming and home release rollout will unfold gradually across different regions over the following years, governed by this expanded Sony Netflix partnership before eventually cycling through to Disney's platforms under the existing pay to arrangement. The broader context behind these arrangements reflects how much the economics of major theatrical releases like Brand New Day have come to depend on downstream streaming value in addition to box office receipts. Sony, unlike Disney, does not operate its own general audience streaming platform at meaningful scale, which is why its biggest theatrical properties, the MCU Spider Man films chief among them, depend on licensing deals with outside platforms to capture value once a film's theatrical run winds down. The original 2021 agreements were negotiated before No Way Home's own record breaking theatrical performance was fully understood, and the expanded, globalized 2026 Netflix deal announced, just months before Brand New Day's release, suggests both companies recalibrated their expectations for the franchise's ongoing value based on that prior success. For audiences outside the US markets that were already covered under the original Netflix arrangement, the expanded deal represents a meaningful shift in how and where they will eventually be able to watch Brand New Day once it leaves theaters. Though the staggered multi-year rollout described in the January 2026 announcement means the exact streaming availability date will vary considerably by territory rather than arriving as a single global premiere reception box office Spider-Man. Brand New Day did not merely perform well commercially, it rewrote the record books within its first weekend. The film opened in North America to a final studio confirmed total of $360 million. According to Monday actuals reported by outlets including Deadline Hollywood and Rotten Tomatoes box office desk, that figure edged past the $357.1 million domestic opening posted by Avengers Endgame in April 2019, a mark that had stood as the all-time domestic opening weekend record for more than 7 years and had been widely assumed to be effectively unbeatable. Early estimates over the weekend itself had been more conservative. Sony initially projected roughly $355 million based on a $169.3 million Friday. Itself a new single day opening record, surpassing Endgame's previous mark of $157.4 million and a $101.5 million Saturday, just shy of Endgame's Saturday record of $109. 2 million, but the studio's Sunday projection of an $84 million close proved slightly conservative. Once final numbers came in, the film's ascent was not confined to North America. Globally, Brand New Day debuted to an estimated $927 million to $932 million across international and domestic markets combined. Reporting varied slightly by outlet and by the point at which figures were finalized, making it the second biggest global opening weekend in film history, trailing only Avengers. Endgame's $1.223 billion review that placed Brand New Day ahead of the previous second place holder, 2018's Avengers, Infinity War, which had opened to roughly $640 million worldwide. It also comfortably surpassed the domestic and global opening numbers posted by No Way Home in 2021, which had debuted to $260.1 million domestically and $587. 2 million worldwide, a result that had been seen as nearly impossible to top given the novelty of that film's multiverse spanning cast and the unusually thin theatrical competition during the pandemic recovery period. With this opening, Brand New Day handed Marvel Studios the distinction of having produced four of the six biggest global opening weekends ever recorded, joining Endgame, No Way Home, and Infinity War on that list. Premium and large format exhibition chains posted historic numbers of their own. Dolby Cinema logged its best grossing domestic weekend ever off the back of the film, taking in $10 million in North American Dolby receipts alone. CJ4DPLEX, the company behind both ScreenX and 4DX, reported that its combined global grosses from those two formats reached $31 million, the biggest opening weekend in the exhibitor's history domestically. ScreenX alone brought in $7 million, more than two and a half times its previous single weekend record, while 4DX delivered $5.2 million, also a domestic record for the format. These results were especially notable given that Brand New Day was shut out of IMAX screens in the United States entirely, with that premium format reserved for the Odyssey under an exclusivity arrangement running through the picture's first 4 weeks in release. Internationally, where the Odyssey had not yet opened, Brand New Day was able to claim IMAX screens directly, pulling in an estimated $23 million from IMAX engagements, led by China's $19 million contribution, which represented the highest grossing IMAX opening weekend the Spider Man franchise had ever posted in that territory. South Korea contributed an additional $2.4 million in IMAX receipts, the biggest opening weekend that format's exhibitor had ever recorded in that market, while Japan added a further $2.2 million in IMAX ticket sales on a shared release schedule, accounting for roughly 18% of the film's entire opening weekend total in that country. In China specifically, the film opened at the top of the local box office with more than $71 million banked within roughly a day and a half of its Wednesday debut, a notable result given that its predecessor, No Way Home, was never cleared for release in that market at all, leaving a gap in the franchise's Chinese box office history that Brand New Day was able to fill largely unopposed. Beyond IMAX, the film also set all time global opening weekend records across several other premium exhibition formats, including 4DX, ScreenX, and D-Box, as well as a number of regional premium, large format brands specific to individual international markets. The film's ripple effects extended into exhibitor business more broadly. Regal Entertainment, the second largest theater chain in the United States, reported that the 4 day stretch spanning July 30 through August 2 was the biggest such period in the company's history, generating more than $160 million globally in combined box office and concession revenue, driven substantially by Brand New Day alongside continued play from the Odyssey. Regal also reported its highest ever spend per patron figure for that period, attributing the boost to strong demand for collectible merchandise tie ins alongside typical concession sales. 13 individual Regal locations ranked among the 20 highest grossing theaters in the country that weekend, including the single top grossing theater nationwide. Momentum continued well beyond opening weekend. Within 6 days of release, the film crossed the $1 billion mark globally, making it the second fastest film ever to reach that threshold, behind only Avengers Endgame. A day later, industry trackers confirmed it had become the highest grossing film of 2026 to that point, surpassing the previous year to date leader, Pixar's Toy Story 5, which had accumulated roughly $1.0165 billion. By its first full week in release, Brand New Day's cumulative global total stood at approximately $1.15 billion. That pace placed the film in rare company, as one of only four films to cross the $1 billion threshold in 2026 to that point, joining Toy Story 5, the Lionsgate release Michael, and Universal, Lumination's The Super Mario Galaxy movie. Analysts and trade outlets openly speculated about whether the film could ultimately challenge No Way Home's own franchise best global total of roughly $1.92 billion, and by extension, whether it might climb into the ranks of the handful of films that have crossed $2 billion worldwide, a group that includes Avengers, Infinity War, Avengers, Endgame, and the all time box office leader,